I had just settled into the wicker chair by the window, letting the late morning sun slice through the blinds in neat, stubborn lines across my notebook, when Wolfe's voice cut through the faint hum of Fritz fussing in the kitchen. "Archie, did you leave the garden tap running again?" "I checked it," I said, glancing up, a little startled. "Twice." He didn't answer, which was his version of a storm warning, so I leaned back, pen poised. The city street outside hissed through a passing cab. The faint smell of Fritz's beef consommé lingered, blending with the sharp perfume of Wolfe's orchids. A quiet morning, ordinary and measured, and I was already imagining my day, a little dictation, a little checking the mail, maybe a nap before lunch. Then came the knock. Not soft, not tentative. Deliberate. Hammering, urgent. 3 sharp raps that ricocheted off the paneling of the front hall. Wolfe stiffened mid-step toward his chair, the expression on his face a careful calculation of disapproval and anticipation. I stood, already moving toward the door. "Who's—" I began, but Wolfe's sharp, precise finger cut me off. "Wait," he said. "Do not answer unless you are certain of purpose. And Archie, take your hat." I grabbed the felt from the stand, shrugging into it as I swung the door open. A man, slim, clean-shaven, and almost impossibly nervous, stood on the threshold. His hat was pushed back, and one hand gripped a folded envelope so tightly the corners bent. "Mr. Wolfe." His voice trembled just enough to make the syllables uneven. "My name. I am Vincent Marlowe. I have information. Urgent information. It concerns a matter of grave importance." Wolfe, seated now behind his massive desk like a dark sentinel, didn't move but raised one eyebrow. "Grave importance," he repeated, his voice even, deliberate, almost surgical in its detachment. "Does that include your life, or mine, or merely the interest of the local constabulary?" Vincent swallowed. "All of them. Possibly. I mean, I am certain it involves—" He faltered, eyes flicking to me, then back to Wolfe. "Someone is in danger, sir." "Archie," Wolfe said, leaning forward, his gaze razor-sharp. "Ask him to be explicit, carefully, without hysteria. Facts first, emotions later." I gestured him inside, closing the door behind him, the click of the latch punctuating the tension. "Start at the beginning," I said. "And Mr. Wolfe prefers precision." Marlowe fidgeted with the envelope, then, under Wolfe's unblinking stare, offered it. It was delivered to me yesterday. I didn't open it until this morning. Instructions were strict. You are to receive it only." I handed the envelope to Wolfe, who didn't immediately touch it. His eyes narrowed, scanning Marlowe as if weighing the man's nervous energy against some invisible scale. "Instructions were strict, you say? By whom?" "The sender." "I don't know, sir. Only that I am not to show it to anyone. That it contains information only you can act upon." His words stumbled, but the urgency behind them was palpable. Wolfe finally lifted the envelope, turning it in his large hands as though testing the weight of both paper and consequence. "Curious," he murmured. Then, to Marlowe, "Sit and tell us everything. From the moment you received this, include every detail that might influence my understanding." The man perched on the edge of the nearest chair, the leather creaking, and began in a rush. "I work in finance, sir. Mulberry Street, small investment firm. I noticed irregularities in the accounts, transactions that didn't match deposits. At first, I thought it was a bookkeeping error, until I discovered names, client names, on documents I shouldn't have access to. Then I got this." He lifted the envelope again, trembling. Wolfe tapped a finger against the desk, slow and deliberate. "And the irregularities, what did they suggest?" "That someone powerful, is hiding embezzlement, laundering money, or worse. There's a list. Marlowe swallowed, glancing at me, then Wolfe. A list of people who know, or might know. It's dangerous, sir. I feared— Ah, Wolfe interjected, the single word cutting the air. Precise, analytic. Fear, and rightly so. Continue. I haven't spoken to anyone. I brought this directly to you because I didn't know where else to go. Someone must stop this. His voice cracked. He swallowed again. I didn't know the names. Just that there were names, and they could be hurt if this falls into the wrong hands. I could feel Wolfe's gaze pinning him to the chair, a predator in repose. Names, documents, instructions to present only to me. All sound very melodramatic, Wolfe said slowly, until the facts bear them out. Archie, see that the envelope remains untouched. We'll open it together. I nodded, watching Marlowe visibly relax under Wolfe's precise control of the situation. It was fascinating the way Wolfe could siphon panic from a man like a surgeon draining poison. Now, Wolfe continued, the source of these instructions. Was there any indication of a sender beyond the envelope itself? A signature? A mark? A seal? Marlowe shook his head. Nothing, just this paper. Ordinary, heavy, cream-colored. The writing typed. Not a single fingerprint. Wolfe leaned back, interlacing his fingers. Archie, we are dealing with caution disguised as urgency, and possibly a careful plan to entangle me personally. I suspect this is not mere happenstance, or someone's idea of a test, I offered, to see if you'll bite. Indeed, Wolfe said, his tone almost approving. And we shall see what is at the other end of the bait before committing to the water. Archie, fetch the magnifying glass. And the ledger. I wish to inspect this envelope meticulously. As I obeyed, Marlowe's eyes darted between Wolfe and me, anxiety clinging like cobwebs. The city outside moved on, indifferent, but the brownstone had contracted sharply, the quiet shattered, charged with potential calamity, and Wolfe, calm and calculating, had already begun to measure its weight. I handed Wolfe the magnifying glass, and he lifted the envelope from the desk with an almost reverent precision, examining the edges, the paper fibers, even the slight indentation where the flap had been sealed. Marlowe leaned forward, hands clenched together, eyes darting between Wolfe's face and the instrument in his hand. Archie, remove the glass, Wolfe said sharply, his eyes never leaving the envelope. I did, lowering it to the desk. He tapped the envelope twice, a soft, deliberate percussion, and then brought it to his nose, inhaling just enough to catch any telltale chemical scent. He murmured, the sound more analytical than approving. Nothing unusual in odor, nor in weight distribution. The sender is competent, ordinary, but competent. Marlowe swallowed. Do you think it's serious? Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He carefully slit the flap, using a knife I didn't know he had tucked in the velvet-lined desk drawer. Then he withdrew the contents, 2 sheets of paper, typed in a meticulous, spidery script with a faint pencil mark in the margin on one line. He leaned back, spreading the papers across the desk, scanning them silently while Marlowe shifted nervously. The pencil mark caught my eye, a small triangle beside a column of names. Wolfe's finger traced the mark once, twice, lingering as if tasting the significance. Names, Wolfe said finally. The list you mentioned, you recognize any? Marlowe peered, squinting at the typed letters. I think so. There's a Mr. Levington, our senior partner, and a few clients I've seen in the ledger. The rest, I can't be certain, but they're all people with influence. Important in the firm and outside it. Dangerous, Wolfe murmured, lifting the envelope to toss it into the wastebasket but stopping midway. Not so fast. It may serve us as a test of credibility. He looked up at Marlowe, the expression as cold and piercing as a scalpel. You delivered it here in person, presumably without intervention. Why not to law enforcement or, more directly, to the authorities who could act without my involvement. Marlowe hesitated, fingers twisting together. I was afraid. Whoever did this, I don't know, but the instructions, they were very clear. And I thought, if anyone could handle it, it would be you. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Flattery is often a poor substitute for logic. Yet you followed directions precisely. That is in your favor. Now, let us see if your judgment matches the reality. Archie, fetch the ledger Marlowe mentioned, the one containing the irregular entries. I moved quickly to Marlowe's side, and he handed me a manila folder, bulging with receipts, memos, and account printouts. The weight alone suggested weeks of meticulous work, yet Wolfe handled it as if it were a feather. He opened it carefully, arranging the pages on the desk with surgical care. "Note the handwriting," he said, tapping the penciled triangle. "Each mark is deliberate, each entry calculated. Whoever marked these intended clarity, not obfuscation. And see here." His finger flicked to a column of figures. The deposits, rounded off consistently, almost too neat, a signature of someone cautious, someone clever, perhaps inside knowledge of the firm's routines. Marlowe's voice trembled as he interjected. "Yes, that's what worried me. I thought maybe someone was laundering funds, but then I saw the names, and I realized that whoever did this could be hiding more than just money." Wolfe leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Indeed, money is a convenient cloak for all manner of corruption. But the human factor, the fear, the anxiety, those are easier to observe than financial transactions." He looked up sharply, fixing Marlowe with a stare that could have frozen molten metal. "Tell me, Mr. Marlowe, in the last week, did you notice anyone acting peculiarly at the firm? Anyone in a hurry, unusually anxious, or asking questions about accounts not under their purview?" Marlowe swallowed again. "Yes. Mr. Levington, sir. He's always precise, but lately he's been fidgeting, checking papers multiple times, asking assistance about transactions he usually ignores." Wolfe nodded once, slowly. "Archie, record that. Human behavior betrays more than ledgers. And here, it seems, someone is aware that we notice." He leaned over the papers, finger tapping a line. "Notice the repetition in the dates. The deposits coincide with weekends when fewer staff are present. Either a signature of careful planning or someone testing the system's blind spots." I scribbled notes while Wolfe examined the entries, eyes flicking like a hawk scanning a forest floor. Marlowe watched us, biting his lip, waiting for some hint of approval or assurance. Wolfe's approval, however, was not dispensed like candy. It was earned, observed, deduced. "And the pencil marks," Wolfe said, tilting the page toward the light. "Triangles, each marking a person of interest. Why triangles? Why not circles or squares?" Simple answer. The sender favors clarity over symbolism, a logical mind, deliberate, probably someone used to issuing instructions, someone who anticipates scrutiny. Marlowe nodded vigorously. Yes, sir. That makes sense. That's why I didn't know what to do. It felt deliberate, calculated, like I was part of a chess game I didn't understand." "Precisely," Wolfe said, eyes narrowing further. "And that is why you are here. You deliver the first piece. We shall see if the remaining moves fall into place without peril to innocent parties. Archie, take note. Our objective is twofold: identify the source and protect those identified." I felt the weight of the afternoon pressing down on us, the brownstone unusually silent except for the soft scrape of Wolfe's pen as he annotated the margin of one sheet, and the faint whiff of orchids in the corner, somehow sharper, more insistent. Marlowe's presence filled the remaining space with nervous energy, making the air tense and expectant. "Mr. Marlowe," Wolfe said, breaking the silence, "your role here is simple. Answer questions truthfully, provide access to any records requested, and refrain from speculation beyond observed facts. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Absolutely. And know this, Wolfe continued, eyes locking on him like a vice. Any deviation, intentional or accidental, will compromise more than information. It could compromise lives. Marlowe's shoulders slumped, the nervous tension temporarily giving way to the gravity of our discussion. I understand, sir. Good, Wolfe said, setting the ledger aside. Archie, we begin with the firm itself. Names, transactions, patterns. Marlowe has delivered the first hint, but the hunt for the mind behind this. That will require observation, deduction, and no small measure of patience. Let us proceed methodically. I nodded, watching Wolfe's hands move over the documents, the lines of his face tightening as he absorbed each detail. This was his element. Control, precision, calculation, and the game had begun. Outside, the city murmured on, indifferent, but here, in the brownstone, the first pieces of a delicate, potentially dangerous puzzle were falling into place. I slid the ledger closer to Wolfe, who leaned over it with a patience that made Marlowe fidget like a rabbit caught in a snare. His fingers traced the columns of numbers, tapping lightly on one entry, then another, each touch deliberate, as if the paper itself might confess its secrets. Archie, Wolfe said without looking up, observe the pattern in the withdrawals. Not the deposits, those are incidental, but the withdrawals. Note the precision of timing. Weekends, early mornings, sometimes evenings, all times when oversight is minimal. I scribbled rapidly. So they're using quiet hours to move money without attracting attention. Makes sense? Not merely sense, Wolfe corrected sharply. Caution and method. This is someone who understands exposure, someone meticulous. Marlowe shifted in his chair. I noticed that too. But it's not just the timing. Some of the amounts are odd. Rounded off, yes, but the same people appear on multiple entries. Patterns repeat in a way that seemed almost deliberate. Deliberate indeed, Wolfe said, tapping the page with a knuckle. Notice the correlations. Client name, account number, and sum. Triangular repetition, just like the pencil marks on your list. The sender isn't careless. They understand that a careful observer might detect this sequence. And that would be us, I added, trying to keep pace with Wolfe's rapid deductions. Exactly, Archie, Wolfe replied, finally lifting his eyes to Marlowe. And it is why you are here, and not elsewhere. Whoever orchestrated this is testing not only our discretion, but our analytic abilities. Marlowe's hands trembled slightly as he gestured toward the ledger. Sir, there's more. There's one account, very small, barely noticed, that keeps showing transactions that don't match anything else. The same client over and over. I thought it was a mistake, but... He swallowed, glancing at Wolfe. I think someone is trying to hide something even smaller than the other irregularities. Something beneath the radar. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Beneath the radar is often the most telling. Large sums attract attention. Subtle manipulation rarely does. Archie, note that observation. Marlowe's diligence may have saved us hours of unnecessary pursuit. I did, scribbling furiously while Wolfe studied the account numbers. Lips pursed. Notice the frequency, he said finally, pointing to the column. Small withdrawals, minimal sums, always consistent with prior behavior of the account holder, yet slightly outside expected parameters, an inside man or someone with access. Likely the latter. Observe how this is not randomness. This is intention carefully concealed beneath routine. Marlowe's eyes widened. So it's someone inside the firm, someone we trust. Wolfe inclined his head once, sharply. Trust is a fragile construct, Mr. Marlowe. What is trusted in routine can be the perfect veil for manipulation. Observe the logic. The irregularities are both visible and invisible. Only someone with intimate knowledge could achieve this balance. I leaned back, letting the import settle. You're saying it's calculated to avoid detection, but still leave traces for an expert to find. Classic Wolfe bait. Wolfe's lip twitched in the faintest acknowledgement of my jest. Perhaps, Archie. But this is no game for amusement. It is a chessboard, and we are observing the first moves. Marlowe's hand shook as he pushed a sheet forward. There's a memo here, he said. Not from our office, but a copy of an internal request. It seems innocuous, but it lists account numbers and several initials. I don't recognize them all. Could they be aliases? Wolfe lifted the page, inspecting the handwriting. Initials can be misleading or revealing. Compare them with the ledger. We are looking for repetition, correlation, anything that might suggest a signature. See here. He tapped the page against the ledger. Patterns emerge when one places the data side by side. Look at the overlap. 3 accounts correspond to 3 initials repeatedly, and all 3 appear on the triangular marks in your envelope. Coincidence? Marlowe shook his head vigorously. No, sir. That's too precise. Exactly. Wolfe leaned back, steepling his fingers. And that is why this investigation, even at its inception, is delicate. One misstep and we expose not merely the perpetrator but the innocent, including yourself, Mr. Marlowe. I frowned, following his finger across the columns. It's clever. The sender or manipulator relies on fear and uncertainty to control behavior. Marlowe delivers the message without question. We interpret it. Meanwhile, the office. Any wrong assumption could compromise everything. Wolfe nodded. Observation, deduction, and control. 3 pillars of prevention. And Archie, note this. The sender's confidence is evident. The paper, the marks, the selection of recipient. All demonstrate a mind calculating risk at multiple levels. Marlowe leaned forward, urgency overtaking his nervousness. Sir, there's one more thing. I noticed a subtle alteration in one account. A date, changed by a day, and the sum adjusted slightly. It wasn't enough to alarm anyone else, but I spotted it. Could it be part of the plan? Wolfe's gaze sharpened, now slicing directly into Marlowe's unease. Spotting such subtleties is exactly what this stage of observation requires. Tell me, Mr. Marlowe, how did you detect the alteration? I noticed the entry didn't match the ledger's formula, a rounding that was slightly off. Minimal, but consistent with someone trying to create a pattern without drawing attention. Wolfe tapped a finger on the desk, thoughtful. Minimal discrepancies to test vigilance, subtle but intentional, remarkable, yet dangerous. And notice, this alteration aligns perfectly with the triangular notation on the envelope. Observation, vigilance, and calculated threat. Whoever orchestrated this wishes to be found, but not too easily. A delicate balance. I exhaled, letting the weight of his words settle. So the person is inside, careful, and clever enough to manage the perception of chance while controlling exposure. That's not a small task. No, Wolfe agreed, eyes narrowing on the ledger. Not a task for the ordinary, but someone meticulous, with access, knowledge, and discipline. Archie, keep that in mind. It narrows our suspect field considerably. Not more than 5 could orchestrate this without error. Likely fewer. Marlowe's anxiety flared. 5. That's everyone at the senior level. If I'm right, He hesitated. It's one of them? Wolfe leaned back, exhaling slowly, the room absorbing the quiet click of deliberate thought. Logic dictates. Timing, access, knowledge, opportunity, all align. And the sender's choice of you as the courier? Designed to test response, reveal diligence. We will see who reacts incorrectly, Archie. That is how we uncover the mind behind this. I leaned forward, resting my elbow on the desk. So we start observing, questioning, and waiting for the first error, and every small detail Marlowe noticed becomes a potential trap or clue. Seems straightforward, if nerve-wracking. Straightforward. Wolfe's tone was dry, almost scornful. Archie, nothing about deception is straightforward. Precision is everything. Timing, behavior, repetition. Errors manifest only to the careful eye, and ours must be the sharpest in the room. Remember that. Marlowe nodded, pale but determined. Yes, sir, I understand. I'll cooperate fully. I promise. Wolfe finally closed the ledger with a soft thump. Good. Begin by listing everyone with access to these accounts, noting routines, habits, and any anomalies. Archie, you will assist and be meticulous. Errors at this stage will compromise more than discovery. They will endanger lives. I felt the tension thicken, the brownstone now fully engaged in the silent, electric calculation that Wolfe favored. Outside, the city pressed on, indifferent, but inside, a careful, dangerous game had begun. Every word, every movement, every glance carried weight. Mr. Marlowe, Wolfe said, standing and gesturing toward the hallway. Prepare to provide access to all relevant files. Do not alter, discard, or omit any detail. Your diligence now is essential. Yes, sir, he said, and for a moment I thought I saw him straighten, the burden of panic tempered by purpose. Wolfe returned to the desk, eyes flicking over the documents again, fingers steepling, mind already racing beyond the numbers and names. Observation, deduction, control. That was the rhythm, and the first steps had been laid. I handed Marlowe a fresh sheet of paper and a pencil, watching him fumble slightly before settling into the chair opposite Wolfe. He looked like a man bracing against the tide, yet determined to obey instructions, which was just as well. Wolfe didn't need hesitation, he needed precision. Begin with the employees who have access to the accounts in question, Wolfe instructed, his voice low but commanding, slicing through the quiet of the brownstone. List names, titles, and typical duties. Archie, ensure the order is logical and consistent. Any deviation will be noted and questioned. I nodded, pen poised. Marlowe's fingers twisted the pencil nervously as he began. All right, there's Mr. Levington, senior partner, as I mentioned. Then Miss Caldwell, the assistant auditor, Mr. Hargrove, who manages internal transfers, and Mr. Benton, junior analyst. They all have access in some capacity. Wolfe leaned back, interlacing his fingers. 4 individuals, all likely to be precise and careful. Observe how access and opportunity coincide. Archie cross-referenced their habitual schedules with the entries we have noted. I scribbled, thinking fast. Levington keeps office hours from 8 to 6. Caldwell arrives at 7:30, leaves at 4. Hargrove, 9 to 5, often late mornings off for errands. Benton, irregular schedule, often shadows other staff for learning purposes. That covers most of the weekday patterns. Weekends are more difficult, but Hargrove occasionally volunteers for weekend audits. Wolfe's finger tapped rhythmically against the desk. Interesting. Weekends. Minimal oversight. And your earlier observation, Archie, of deposits and withdrawals timed during quiet hours, coincides with our preliminary suspect routines. Make a note of that correlation. Marlowe's voice broke slightly as he continued. I noticed that some clients' files are stored in the back cabinet, which only Caldwell and Levington routinely access. Hargrove and Benton, rarely. And the altered account I mentioned, it's kept in a separate drawer, marked confidential. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Confidential, and yet accessible to a subset. Subset including the triangular notation recipients. Observe how the control of information is critical to both concealment and influence. Exactly, I said, leaning forward. So the manipulator knows the system intimately. Who can access what, when, and how. They're exploiting gaps in oversight, testing diligence and leveraging trust. Classic insider work. Wolfe didn't reply immediately, fingers tracing the margin of the ledger again. Finally, he said, "Yes, Archie. A note to the psychological component. The sender selected Mr. Marlowe as courier precisely because he is cautious, yet impressionable. By creating tension, the sender elicits errors in judgment or reveals patterns otherwise unnoticed. We are observing a layered strategy, financial manipulation married to human response." Marlowe, apparently encouraged, continued more confidently. "I also noticed that Benton frequently photocopies documents for training purposes. Sometimes duplicates are left in the machine overnight, which, well, I thought it was a security flaw." Wolfe lifted an eyebrow, lips pursed. "A flaw or an opportunity? Observe the minor exposures that can facilitate concealment. Our manipulator, I suspect, is familiar with these operational weaknesses." "Meaning someone could have planted false entries or adjusted amounts while documents were being duplicated?" I asked. "Precisely," Wolfe said. "And the pattern in the ledger, the triangular pencil marks, align with these minimal exposures. The sender is testing the boundaries, Archie. Each subtle error or adjustment is a message or a probe." Marlowe's pencil wobbled as he marked his paper. "Sir, I noticed something else. Some entries are missing entirely. There's a blank space where a transaction should be. I thought it was a mistake until I saw that the dates were intentionally skipped, not random." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "Intentional omissions?" "Yes. Notice how the manipulator controls both presence and absence. That is an advanced level of sophistication. Errors of omission are harder to detect than errors of commission, and they are often invisible to the untrained eye." I scribbled quickly. "So the strategy involves timing, access, psychological pressure, and deliberate omission. We're looking for someone meticulous, with inside knowledge and patience, probably someone at a senior level, as we suspected." "Indeed, Archie. And consider the envelope," Wolfe added, lifting the paper once more. "The triangular marks indicate priority, focus, and a hierarchy of concern. 3 primary targets are highlighted. They are the sender's concern or the potential leverage points. We must ascertain why these individuals were selected." Marlowe's eyes widened. I think I can answer that. The 3 highlighted accounts, they all involve large investors or clients who could attract scrutiny if anomalies were discovered. The sender wants to prevent attention from reaching these individuals, for their own safety or for advantage. Wolfe's lips twitched in what I interpreted as near approval. "Good, Mr. Marlowe. You are beginning to perceive the structure of the design. Observe. Fear, precision, concealment, and leverage. Every action calculated to yield insight without exposure." I looked at Wolfe, noting how his hands moved over the pages, adjusting one slightly, lifting another, arranging the ledger in a pattern that seemed almost ritualistic. "Sir, how do we move forward? Do we start questioning these 4? "No," Wolfe said, voice low and deliberate. "Not yet. Observation first, surveillance, examination of habitual behavior, subtle inquiry, small pressure to reveal cracks in composure. Questions alone will alert the manipulator. We must be unobtrusive. Archie, you will assist with discreet observation within the firm. Mr. Marlowe, you provide full access to records and any minor anomalies noted. This is an exercise in patience and deduction." Marlowe nodded, visibly relieved at clear instructions. "Yes, sir. Anything you need, records, files, anything, I'll provide." Wolfe steepled his fingers again, eyes narrowed, scanning the ledger one final time. "Archie, observe the ledger's chronological anomalies. Pay attention to frequency, minor adjustments, and omissions. All are indicators of the sender's methodology. Pattern recognition is key. The manipulator is testing for insight, and only insight will uncover identity." I caught a subtle shift in Marlowe's posture, the first sign of tentative confidence. "Sir, he said. I also noticed that some entries have annotations in pencil that match the handwriting on the envelope. Could that indicate the same person? Wolfe's eyes flicked toward the envelope. Yes, that is what we must determine. Triangular notations, pencil annotations, and handwriting, three independent but related signals. Observe how redundancy is used to ensure accuracy or to mislead. Analysis must separate coincidence from design. I wrote it all down, the weight of Wolfe's deductions pressing on me. The game was intricate, precise, and deadly if mishandled. Yet there was an undeniable thrill in the intellectual hunt, the subtle interplay of human psychology, deduction, and careful observation. Wolfe finally set the ledger aside, leaning back in the chair and closing his eyes briefly. Archie, we have the framework: access, timing, psychological manipulation, and layered concealment. All other actions, questions, surveillance, interactions must flow from this framework. Any deviation compromises not only the discovery of the manipulator, but the safety of those targeted. I glanced at Marlowe, whose face now held a determined, almost wary focus. Understood, sir. I'll follow your instructions to the letter. Good. Then we begin, Wolfe said. And observe everything. The first error, no matter how minor, will be revealing. And Archie. His gaze fixed on me, precise and piercing. Be alert to human behavior. Often it is the small tremor in composure, not the ledger, that exposes intent. Outside, the city remained indifferent, the brownstone itself almost too quiet, yet inside, every breath, glance, and movement felt charged with potential consequence. The hunt had begun. I rose from my chair, stretching my back, and noticed Marlowe hesitating near the door, as if unsure whether he was allowed to leave or stay in the brownstone. Wolfe's eyes, cold and precise, fixed on him like a hawk observing prey. Sit, Wolfe said, voice low and absolute. We are not finished with you, and there are details yet to extract. Marlowe nodded, shuffling back into the chair, and I could see the tension tighten his shoulders. He delivered the envelope, provided the ledger, and yet every syllable now seemed measured, careful, almost rehearsed. Wolfe's gaze didn't miss a tremor, a hesitation, or a subtle twitch. He never did. Archie, Wolfe said, leaning forward and steepling his fingers. We must examine motive. The manipulation of funds is evident. The psychological play on Mr. Marlowe is clear, but the question remains. Why? What is the sender's ultimate objective? I shrugged, resting my elbows on the desk. Money laundering, insider advantage, concealing errors. Take your pick, or all three. Partial, Wolfe corrected sharply. The envelope, the marks, the choice of courier, all point to a desire not merely to conceal, but to observe, to test response, to measure discretion. Observe, Archie. The sender wishes to be detected by the correct eyes while remaining hidden from the casual. Marlowe's hand twitched. Sir, if they want to be detected, why all the secrecy? Why not contact the authorities directly? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Fear, control, and leverage. By selecting a single intermediary, the sender both exercises control over information flow and gauges the reliability of the recipient. Mr. Marlowe's diligence validates our entry into the puzzle. Errors, exaggerations, or panic would compromise the entire operation. I made a note, thinking about the triangulated pencil marks, the deliberate omissions, and subtle alterations. So we're a controlled experiment, and the misdirection, small errors, altered amounts, is to test observation to see if anyone notices before the sender makes a more significant move. Correct, Wolfe said, voice smooth as cut glass. The manipulator calculates behavior, access, and timing. All three must align for success. Any deviation risks exposure. Marlowe leaned forward, urgency overtaking his nerves. Sir, there's something else I found. In the ledger, some of the transactions, they seem to correspond to unusual client activity. Social events, trips, vacations, dates that would normally keep the client away from the office. Could that be significant? Wolfe's eyes lit briefly with interest. Excellent observation. Displacement of client attention is often a critical element in concealment schemes. By timing financial manipulations when oversight is minimal, the manipulator reduces risk while maintaining normal appearances. Observe, Archie. All anomalies are designed with deliberate consideration of human behavior. I scribbled furiously, trying to keep pace. So not only the firm's employees, but the clients themselves are part of the equation. They're effectively unwitting actors in the sender's design. Yes, Wolfe said, tapping the ledger. And notice how each small action compounds. Timing, omission, selective access, human psychology. Each is a lever. The sender pulls each lever with intent and measures the effect. It is elegant in its precision. Marlowe swallowed and leaned back. Sir, there was a phone call I received yesterday. I didn't mention it before because I wasn't sure of its relevance. A voice, low, deliberate, warning me to deliver the envelope only to Mr. Wolfe. No other instructions. No identification. I thought it strange. Wolfe's eyes snapped to Marlowe. A phone call, not written. Voice? Direct. Observe the layered security. Physical delivery plus auditory reinforcement. Interesting. Any details? Only that the voice was calm. Controlled. Male, I think. Emphasized secrecy. Threat. Implied threat. I can't be certain. Implied threat often motivates caution more effectively than explicit, Wolfe said, eyes narrowing. And the timing? Yesterday, you said. Yes, sir. Late afternoon. Archie, note the psychological reinforcement. The sender ensures compliance not by brute force, but by perception of consequence. Observe how fear complements the puzzle, creating both tension and obedience. Mr. Marlowe was chosen precisely for this vulnerability. I glanced at him. He looked pale but determined. It's working. He's following instructions perfectly. No hesitation, no second-guessing. Yes, Archie. Yet every action now must be validated against observation. Errors, even minor, may expose patterns or mislead us. That is the risk inherent in layered deception. Wolfe leaned back, tapping a finger against the desk. Next, we examine the employee's routines against transaction anomalies. Begin with Levington. Note exact times, habits, and access points. Mr. Marlowe, you provide any irregularities you've observed. Archie, you record everything, cross-reference meticulously. Errors now will compromise more than clarity. They may endanger innocence. Marlowe nodded, reaching for the folder he had set aside. Sir, I kept notes on each employee. Times, patterns, small habits. Things like who locks which drawer, who leaves documents on the desk, who checks certain accounts first thing in the morning. Excellent, Wolfe said, fingers drumming softly. Begin. As Marlowe read through his notes, I kept pace, recording the details. Levington arrived promptly at 8, rarely deviated from schedule, and personally oversaw high-value transfers. Caldwell arrived earlier, left earlier, but handled sensitive client documents in the back cabinet. Hargrove's irregular weekend audits coincided with minimal oversight, and Benton's tendency to photocopy or observe junior staff provided the occasional opportunity for exposure. Observe the overlap, Wolfe said, tracing a finger across the ledger. Timing, access, habitual patterns all intersect with the anomalies detected in the ledger. Weekends, confidential drawers, photocopier exposure, each an avenue for concealment or manipulation. Archie cross-reference. I scribbled while Wolfe studied Marlowe's notes. So we're narrowing the suspect field. Each opportunity corresponds with the irregular transactions. Whoever manipulated this had to have detailed knowledge of both procedure and personnel habits. Yes, and observe the psychological overlay, choice of courier, warning call, envelope presentation, all designed to measure response. Every factor has two functions, concealment and measurement. The sender tests, observes, and adjusts. Marlowe's voice faltered slightly. Sir, if this continues, someone could get hurt. Someone at the firm or even a client. Precisely, Wolfe said, eyes flicking to the envelope once more. And that is why caution governs every step we take. Observation, deduction, and control. Errors must be avoided. I leaned back, feeling the tension, the weight of responsibility pressing down. Wolfe's calculations were methodical, precise, relentless. Every name, every transaction, every gesture mattered, and Marlowe's nervous diligence provided the thread we could follow. Wolfe tapped a finger against the ledger. Archie. Note. First stage complete. Framework established. Observation and data collection proceed. The manipulator's identity will emerge from the intersections of opportunity, access, and human behavior. Patience and attention will reveal what forceful methods cannot. Marlowe exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing slightly. I understand, sir. I'll continue to provide anything needed. Good, Wolfe said, returning his gaze to the ledger. Observation continues. Every detail matters. Every anomaly, every hesitation, every deviation must be recorded. One misstep may be fatal to our understanding, or worse, to those the manipulator seeks to shield or manipulate. Archie, prepare for field observation. Mr. Marlowe, maintain meticulous records. I glanced at Wolfe, noting the quiet intensity, the almost palpable tension that had filled the brownstone. Outside, the city carried on indifferent, but here, every second, every movement, every glance counted. I rose from my chair, stretching my legs, and noticed Marlowe sitting a little straighter, pencil poised, ready to catalogue the next series of observations Wolfe had assigned. The brownstone had settled into a tense quiet, the kind that feels like the air itself is holding its breath. Wolfe, of course, didn't notice it. He never did. His attention was pinned entirely to the ledger, the envelope, and the human behavior entwined around them. Archie, Wolfe said, lifting his gaze for the briefest instant, we must examine not merely the transactions, but the subtle traces left in the handling of documents. Who touches what, when, and how. These are often more telling than the sums themselves. I nodded, already visualizing the office layout Marlowe had described. The confidential drawer, the photocopier, the back cabinet, and the patterns in timing. Small gestures, small deviations, repeated and observed. These were Wolfe's bread and butter. Marlowe scribbled furiously. Sir, I noticed that some of the documents marked confidential are often placed slightly askew after being accessed. Usually the person who handled them doesn't straighten them perfectly, and it's always consistent with who accessed the file last. Wolfe's eyes narrowed, a faint crease forming between his brows. Ah, subtle displacement. Excellent. These minute details betray habitual action, often revealing the individual without direct observation. Note, Archie, the manipulator, or any insider, relies on the natural carelessness of others to create cover. Deviations in habit provide the observational key. I scribbled, noting the psychological overlay Wolfe emphasized. So, we're looking for patterns of habitual behavior, inconsistencies, and the anomalies Marlowe has already highlighted. Altogether, they create a behavioral map we can analyze against the ledger. Precisely, Wolfe said, tapping the edge of the ledger. Archie, so observe how minor human error is as informative as deliberate manipulation. One tells us what is, the other what is intended to appear. Marlowe glanced up, anxiety still, present but tempered by purpose. Sir, there's also the issue of access codes. Certain internal accounts require multiple authorizations. I noticed that occasionally Benton signs for a transfer without the usual countersignature. It's brief, almost imperceptible. But it happens. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. That is significant. Observe the convergence of opportunity and habit. An irregular signature, particularly in a context where multiple authorizations are standard, is either reckless oversight or calculated subversion. Archie, note the pattern. Frequency, timing, and context are all critical. I scribbled furiously. So we have intentional alterations, subtle omissions, habitual cues, and now procedural deviations, all potentially orchestrated by a manipulator or insider. It's starting to resemble a latticework of control. Indeed, Wolfe said, eyes moving across the ledger once more. And note the interplay of fear. The courier, Mr. Marlowe, is compelled by implied threat. The manipulator exercises psychological leverage while remaining insulated. It is subtle, effective, and, if ignored, potentially catastrophic. Marlowe shifted nervously. I also noticed that when some clients visit, certain transactions seem to adjust slightly. Dates, amounts, small, just enough to match expected patterns but not trigger alarms. Could that be deliberate? Wolfe's fingers drummed lightly against the desk. Predictive alignment. Small, calculated adjustments to maintain appearances. Observe, Archie. The manipulator accounts for external variables beyond direct access. Client presence, office schedules, even social activity, all considered. I leaned back, letting the enormity of Wolfe's deductions sink in. So we're dealing with someone not only inside the firm but intimately aware of routines, behavior, and oversight gaps, all orchestrated with precision and foresight. Exactly, Wolfe said, tapping the pencil against the desk, and noticed the envelope selection, the phone call, and the markings. Redundancy and psychological reinforcement. Each element functions as a test. The manipulator desires observation, not immediate exposure. Marlowe's hand twitched, pencil hesitating over the page. Sir, I also realized that certain anomalies coincide with minor errors by other staff. Small mistakes that ordinarily wouldn't matter, but they're leveraged to conceal or distract from larger manipulations. Exploiting human error, Wolfe said. A classic strategy. Archie, observe how the manipulator integrates the predictable fallibility of others into the plan. It is both opportunistic and cunning. And note, the triangular marks are not arbitrary. They highlight accounts requiring scrutiny in the context of human behavior. I nodded. So the triangular marks indicate attention points, behavioral leverage, and perhaps potential risk for exposure. It all converges. Ledger, anomalies, habitual cues, procedural deviations, and human oversight. Yes, Wolfe said, eyes narrowing to a slit. And observe, Archie, how risk is managed. Minimal exposure, layered observation, and constant testing of the courier. Every action designed to preserve the manipulator's anonymity while ensuring the plan progresses. Errors are tolerated only if they serve the manipulator's ultimate objective. Marlowe swallowed, pencil trembling slightly. Sir, I'm beginning to see how careful this person is. I didn't realize until now that even minor oversights could compromise everything. Exactly, Mr. Marlowe. Precision is absolute. Observation without error is paramount. And Archie, note, the first stage of analysis, pattern recognition, is complete. We now move to stage 2, behavioral testing within the office environment. The manipulator's identity will emerge as discrepancies accumulate under controlled scrutiny. I leaned forward, thinking about the practical implications. So we shadow, observe, and subtly provoke responses without alerting anyone. Measure reactions, compare against the ledger, and identify the pattern in human behavior. Then we triangulate. Correct, Archie. And note the hierarchy of concern. High-value accounts, primary personnel, and the envelope's designated recipients, each a vector for observation. The manipulator calculates probability of detection against utility of action, minimal exposure, maximal insight. Marlowe scribbled furiously. Sir, should I prepare copies of the ledger for observation in the field, or is that premature? Wolfe shook his head slowly. Premature. Direct access under controlled conditions is essential. Copies introduce variables. Any variance in presentation could compromise detection of subtle cues. Patience, Mr. Marlowe. Precision before dissemination. I glanced at Wolfe, noting the steady intensity in his eyes. So we're not only tracking numbers and names, but gestures, habits, timing, and micro-errors. Everything contributes to the final picture. Yes, Archie. And note the psychological calibration. The manipulator gauges attention, reaction, and diligence. Each observed behavior informs subsequent actions. Failure to comprehend this renders the ledger meaningless, despite apparent anomalies. Marlowe's pencil hovered over the page, and he hesitated. Sir, I'm realizing the depth of risk here. One slip, even unintentional, could endanger not just the investigation, but lives. Wolfe's gaze fixed on him like a lens. And that is precisely why observation, meticulous recording, and adherence to protocol are essential. You are an instrument, Mr. Marlowe. Your diligence ensures the integrity of our analysis and the safety of those potentially affected. I scribbled the last of my notes, feeling the weight of the task. Every gesture, every flicker of hesitation, every anomaly, all of it mattered. Outside, the city hummed on, oblivious, while inside the brownstone, the chessboard was laid bare, each move deliberate, each piece observed, each potential misstep amplified in significance. Wolfe leaned back, hands steepled, eyes scanning the ledger one last time before setting it aside. Stage 2 begins now. Observation in situ. Human behavior will reveal opportunity, motive, and the identity of the manipulator. Precision, discretion, and patience, Archie. Any deviation compromises more than discovery. It jeopardizes all involved. Marlowe nodded, swallowing nervously but resolutely. Understood, sir. I'll follow your instructions carefully. Good. Then we proceed, Wolfe said, his voice quiet but lethal in its authority. Every detail matters, every reaction counts, and the first error, no matter how subtle, will be telling. I exhaled, feeling the familiar electric tension in the brownstone. The hunt had truly begun, and every small movement, glance, and hesitation from now on carried weight. Wolfe's mind, meticulous and unrelenting, had already begun to map the battlefield. I shifted in my chair, feeling the stiff leather crease beneath me, and watched Marlowe carefully align the pages of the ledger. The faint scratch of pencil on paper was the only sound besides Wolfe's measured breathing, each exhale deliberate, as if marking the rhythm of his own thought process. Archie, Wolfe said suddenly, fingers steepled, eyes on the ledger. Observe the discrepancy in account 47B. Minimal alteration, barely perceptible, yet consistent with prior deviations. This is not an error, it is a signature. I leaned closer, squinting at the figures. Signature in behavior rather than handwriting. You mean the manipulator deliberately adjusted these entries in a consistent pattern? Yes, Wolfe said, voice sharp. The pattern reveals a mind both cautious and confident. Observe, repetition with subtle variation. Intentional enough to indicate skill, imperceptible enough to avoid casual detection. Marlowe swallowed, pencil trembling slightly. Sir, I noticed that too, but I wasn't sure it was significant. The sums are tiny, hardly noticeable, but the pattern, yes, it's there. Wolfe tapped the ledger lightly. Correct, and the psychological component is vital. The manipulator anticipates observation by those diligent enough to notice, yet ensures the pattern remains invisible to casual scrutiny. Archie. Note, sophistication and subtlety are equally applied to both action and concealment. I nodded, making detailed notes. So the manipulator is testing our vigilance as well as maintaining concealment. Every small adjustment functions on 2 levels. Exactly, Wolfe said, eyes narrowing. And observe the convergence of opportunity. The minor alterations coincide with gaps in access control, times when oversight is minimal or when attention is likely distracted by routine activity. Human behavior is as much a variable as ledger entries. Marlowe leaned forward, visibly anxious. Sir, there's another detail. The alterations sometimes correspond with client meetings, dates when certain clients are away, traveling, or otherwise engaged. Could that indicate manipulation timed with absence? Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Indeed. Observe. Timing aligned with reduced oversight ensures both operational continuity and minimization of exposure. It is deliberate, Archie. And notice the redundancy. The triangular pencil marks correlate precisely with these high-risk periods. Subtle, yet deliberate. I scribbled rapidly, trying to keep pace. So each marked account, each minor alteration, each timing decision is intentional. Nothing here is accidental. No, Wolfe said firmly. Nothing. Observe how the manipulator orchestrates both financial and human elements, creating a lattice of control. Minimal exposure, maximum insight, layered observation. Precision is everything. Marlowe hesitated, pencil poised. Sir, I also noticed a discrepancy in the handling of one document. A memo intended for the senior partner was initially misfiled, then corrected. It seemed trivial, but the timing of the correction, almost immediately after the altered transaction, struck me as deliberate. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Excellent observation. Observe how minor procedural deviations, misfiling, correction, adjustment, can serve as markers or signals. The manipulator may use such discrepancies to measure attentiveness or compliance. Archie, note, human error and deliberate signaling are often intertwined. I glanced at Wolfe. So every error, intentional or otherwise, can serve a dual purpose. Concealment and observation. The manipulator is measuring responses while preserving anonymity. Precisely, Wolfe said, tapping the ledger again. And observe the layering. Financial anomalies, human behavior, procedural deviations, psychological leverage, all converging to provide maximum insight with minimal exposure. Our task is to disentangle these threads and identify the orchestrator. Marlowe's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his pencil. Sir, if this is so meticulous, then one slip could expose everything. How do we prevent that? Wolfe's gaze pierced him. Observation, Mr. Marlowe. Strict adherence to protocol, diligence, and patience. Each step, carefully monitored, ensures that errors do not propagate. You will provide complete access to information, and we will observe. Human behavior is predictable under pressure, yet subtle enough to reveal intent when properly measured. I scribbled, feeling the weight of the investigation pressing down. The ledger, the envelope, the minor behavioral cues, they were all threads in an intricate web, and we were only beginning to trace the pattern. Archie, Wolfe continued, voice low and deliberate, the next stage requires field observation. You will attend the firm unobtrusively, noting behavior, timing, access patterns, and interactions. Mr. Marlowe will accompany you as guide, providing access and insight. Any deviation from expected behavior must be recorded in detail. Even minor anomalies are significant. I nodded. Understood. We're basically mapping behavior and cross-referencing it with the ledger's irregularities. Exactly, Wolfe said. And note, the manipulator is aware of surveillance risk. Any overt action may provoke countermeasures. We proceed subtly, observing without revealing awareness. Discretion is paramount. Marlowe's pencil scratched furiously as he added notes. Sir, should I prepare a summary of anomalies I've noticed so far, or will raw data suffice? Wolfe considered for a moment, then said, "Raw data. Interpretation comes after careful observation. Any premature analysis risks misdirection. Archie, ensure comprehensive recording, chronological and precise. Mr. Marlowe, provide full transparency. Deviations, however minor, are vital. We are measuring not only acts, but reactions." I glanced at Wolfe, noting the meticulous intensity in his eyes. "So we're not just tracking numbers or names, but gestures, habits, reactions. Every micro-error, every hesitation, every subtle deviation. It all feeds into the final deduction." "Yes," Wolfe said, voice smooth as polished stone. "Observation under controlled conditions will reveal the manipulator's identity, access, opportunity, psychological profile, and response patterns all converge. One error, one overlooked detail, and the web begins to unravel." Marlowe swallowed and leaned back. I understand, sir. I'll follow instructions meticulously. Anything you need, I'll provide." "Good," Wolfe said, returning his gaze to the ledger. "Begin preparations for field observation. Ensure all materials, access permissions, and behavioral notes are organized. Archie, you will assist in structuring observation, logging details, and cross-referencing anomalies against the ledger. Accuracy is critical. Any oversight now may compromise discovery or endanger individuals." I nodded, pen poised, feeling the tension thicken. The brownstone was quiet but charged, every movement, glance, and hesitation amplified by Wolfe's analytical intensity. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent, while inside, we were assembling a lattice of observation, ready to measure human behavior against ledger anomalies and subtle manipulation. "Archie," Wolfe said finally, voice cutting the silence. "One more point. Observe the behavioral thresholds. The manipulator has likely tested employees before, noting responses to minor deviations. Your role is to create conditions under which responses are revealed without detection. Subtle pressure, minor deviation, careful observation, these are the keys to identification." I exhaled slowly, letting the plan settle. Field observation, careful, measurement, cross-referencing, and subtle provocation. It was delicate work, the kind that required patience, focus, and precision. And Wolfe, as always, had mapped the path in his mind before even a pencil had touched paper. Marlowe's pencil hovered once more. Then he began to jot, visibly steadier, as if finally comprehending the gravity and structure of the plan. Outside, the city hummed on, oblivious. Inside, the brownstone was a nerve center, calculating every move, weighing every reaction, preparing to unmask a meticulous manipulator whose identity remained carefully hidden among shadows, numbers, and human behavior. I rose from my chair, stretching just enough to feel the tension in my shoulders, and moved toward the desk where Wolfe had arranged the ledger, envelope, and Marlowe's notes in a meticulous grid. Each page, pencil marked, and triangular notation seemed to pulse with significance under Wolfe's unwavering gaze. He didn't acknowledge my movement. His mind was elsewhere, locked in the lattice of patterns he'd constructed. "Archie," Wolfe said, fingers tapping the edge of the ledger with rhythmic precision. "The next stage requires refinement. Observation alone is insufficient. We must begin controlled interaction, eliciting behavior without alerting the manipulator. Minor prompts, subtle challenges, and careful measurement. The manipulator's response will be revealing." I nodded, scribbling, feeling the weight of his instructions. Controlled provocation. Subtle cues designed to provoke an unguarded response, all while maintaining anonymity of the observer. "Got it." Marlowe leaned forward, pencil poised. "Sir, I can provide access to internal communications. Memos, emails, directives, all non-sensitive initially. Would that help?" "Yes," Wolfe said, lifting his eyes momentarily, sharp and precise. Observation without complete data is speculation. Provide what is safe. Archie will catalogue and cross-reference with anomalies noted. Behavior often reveals itself in response to accessible information. I move to arrange the materials, so we start with information that's visible to multiple staff members, then note reactions, deviations, hesitations. Each micro-response could indicate involvement or knowledge of manipulations. Precisely, Wolfe said, steepling his fingers. Observe, measure, interpret, and remember, Archie, subtlety is essential. An overt prompt could compromise both the observation and the subject's natural responses. The manipulator anticipates scrutiny. Any overt pressure will trigger defensive concealment. Marlowe nodded, pencil moving over the page with more confidence. I also noticed something odd. Certain memos circulated without signatures, usually procedural, but someone in the office commented on the lack of verification. They questioned the validity quietly to a colleague, but no one acted formally. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Informal scrutiny. Perfect. Observe how the manipulator relies on habitual compliance to avoid detection. Employees notice, remark, but do not act, creating a veil for manipulation. This is critical. Archie. Record. I scribbled, noting the subtle interplay of human oversight and deliberate concealment. So deviations in procedure, unnoticed or unaddressed, provide both cover and insight. The manipulator exploits inattention while observing for discernment. Yes, Wolfe said. And notice, Archie, the temporal distribution of actions. The triangular marks on the envelope correlate with high-risk periods, weekends, early mornings, holidays. The manipulator leverages predictable gaps in attention and oversight. Combine that with procedural anomalies and minor errors. We have a lattice of both opportunity and measurement. Marlowe hesitated. Sir, I also noticed interactions between employees that seemed guarded. Not overtly secretive, but slight tension when discussing certain accounts. Could those indicate awareness of anomalies? Very likely, Wolfe said, eyes narrowing. Observe human behavior in response to perceived threats. Subtle shifts in posture, phrasing, timing, or attention reveal internal calculations. The manipulator counts on these micro-reactions to anticipate detection and adjust accordingly. I leaned back, letting Wolfe's analysis settle. So it's not just transactions and timing, but human behavior under scrutiny. Reactions, hesitations, micro-errors, all data points. Exactly, Wolfe said, tapping the ledger. And observe the redundancy. Triangular marks, pencil annotations, temporal patterns, all converge to reinforce observation and concealment. The manipulator is meticulous, yet confident in human predictability. Every reaction we record brings clarity. Marlowe scribbled, visibly absorbed, yet still tense. Sir, if we're tracking behavior, should I note minor social interactions, informal remarks, small disagreements, even offhand comments? Yes, Wolfe said, voice precise. All communication, verbal and nonverbal, is data. Observe, Archie, and cross-reference. Patterns in dialogue, micro-expressions, and timing of remarks are revealing. Deviations from norm may indicate either knowledge of manipulation or direct involvement. I jotted down his instructions. Subtle cues, human behavior, minor deviations, temporal correlations, all part of identifying the manipulator. It's meticulous work, but necessary. Indeed, Wolfe said. And note, Archie, the psychological pressure applied to Mr. Marlowe is an element of the test. Fear, anticipation, and responsibility influence both the courier and the subjects. Observation must include reactions under duress. Micro-behavior under stress is a clear indicator of competence or concealment. Marlowe's hand trembled slightly. Sir, I'll continue to provide details as I observe. Anything unusual? Any hesitation or irregularity? I'll note. Good, Wolfe said. Now we begin pattern correlation. Archie, cross-reference access schedules, transaction anomalies, procedural deviations, and human responses. Pay particular attention to minor errors, typographical mistakes, pencil annotations, timing inconsistencies. The manipulator relies on these gaps for concealment and measurement. I glanced at the ledger, the envelope, and Marlowe's notes. The lattice was becoming clearer. Each transaction, each pencil mark, each hesitation was a thread in a complex network. Followed carefully, it could reveal the manipulator's identity. Misread, and the entire plan could unravel. Sir, Marlowe said quietly, I also noticed that some employees occasionally delegate tasks in unexpected ways. Hargrove, for example, sometimes lets Benton handle high-value transfers without oversight. Could that indicate anything? Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Opportunity, delegation, particularly irregular delegation, introduces vulnerability. Observe the alignment between access opportunity and behavioral patterns. This is a critical vector. Archie, note all instances where habitual delegation diverges from protocol. Deviations often indicate either oversight or intentional manipulation. I scribbled furiously. So, irregular delegation, timing, procedural deviations, and human response all converge. Each is a clue, but only together do they reveal the manipulator. Yes, Wolfe said, tapping the ledger with measured force. Integration of variables is essential. Observe, correlate, and analyze. One variable alone may be insignificant. Multiple aligned variables expose the orchestrator. Marlowe exhaled, pencil poised. Sir, I'm beginning to see how subtle this is. The manipulator controls timing, opportunity, human response, and even perception. Every action seems calculated. Precisely, Wolfe said. Observation alone is insufficient. Measurement, correlation, and interpretation reveal intent. Archie, Stage 2, controlled observation in situ, will test our hypotheses. We apply minor prompts, monitor reactions, and record deviations. The manipulator's identity will emerge from convergence of anomalies. I leaned back, feeling the tension thicken. The brownstone was quiet, yet charged. Every pencil mark, glance, and gesture carried weight. Wolfe's mind moved like a predator through the lattice of data, poised to strike at the first revealing error. Mr. Marlowe, Wolfe said finally, voice cutting through the silence. Prepare for the controlled observation phase. Archie will accompany you, documenting all behavior, access, and interaction. Any deviation, however minor, may be critical. Understand? Yes, sir, Marlowe said, nodding. Hands steady now, pencil ready. I understand. Good, Wolfe said, leaning back. Observation, correlation, and subtle measurement. This is the key. One misstep may reveal all. Remember that. I scribbled the final notes, eyes on Wolfe, who returned to the ledger with that same piercing focus, already calculating the next step in our methodical pursuit. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious, while inside, the brownstone's air hummed with precise intent, each breath, movement, and hesitation a vital part of uncovering the manipulator, hiding in plain sight. I rose from my chair, adjusting my notebook on the desk, and watched Wolfe as he leaned over the ledger with that familiar intensity, fingers lightly drumming against the edge, eyes scanning every column, every notation. Marlowe sat nearby, pencil poised, breathing shallow but deliberate, as if synchronizing with Wolfe's methodical rhythm. Archie, Wolfe said, voice smooth but sharp. We proceed with Stage 3, controlled interaction within the office environment. Observation alone has yielded the framework. Now, we introduce subtle, calculated prompts to measure behavior, attention, and response. I nodded. pen poised. Controlled prompts. Nothing overt, only minor deviations designed to provoke natural reactions. Precisely, Wolfe replied, tapping the ledger. Observe the convergence of opportunity, access, and behavioral response. This manipulator relies on habitual patterns and predictable responses. A subtle challenge, a minor anomaly, will provoke revealing deviation. Document all micro-behavior meticulously. Marlowe leaned forward, eyes wide. Sir, I can prepare access to communications, internal notes, and even logs of minor transactions. It may help establish a baseline before interaction begins. Yes, Wolfe said, voice deliberate. Baseline is essential. Controlled observation requires an understanding of ordinary behavior. Archie? Note, deviation from the baseline. Hesitation, phrasing, micro-movements is the data we require. Mr. Marlowe, provide the documents as instructed. Accuracy is paramount. I began cross-referencing access logs with anomalies Marlowe had noted, mapping them against the triangular markings and altered transactions. The lattice of observation was expanding, each thread feeding the other, each behavior and detail a potential key to the manipulator's identity. Observe the pencil marks, Wolfe said, lifting his gaze briefly. Triangular notation is a primary vector. It highlights accounts that require vigilance. Correlate these with human activity. Minor deviations will indicate not only awareness, but intent. Archie, begin mapping behavioral response against these marked accounts. I nodded, pen moving quickly. So we're looking for signs of recognition, subtle stress, hesitation, or micro-corrections, any hint that someone knows or has manipulated these entries. Yes, Wolfe said, eyes narrowing. And note the psychological overlay. The manipulator has imposed fear and expectation upon Mr. Marlowe. That same psychological pressure extends to the office, environment. Reactions under stress are as revealing as deviations in accounting. Marlowe scribbled furiously, still tense but focused. Sir, I noticed that certain employees occasionally handle high-value transfers while consulting minimal documentation. I thought it normal, but the pattern aligns with the anomalies. Could that indicate manipulation? Indeed, Wolfe said, voice sharp. Observe opportunity created by routine. The manipulator leverages habitual compliance to execute precise actions unnoticed. Minor deviations, such as consulting less documentation, create risk vectors. Archie, note each instance. I mapped the entries, noting Hargrove's weekend audits, Benton's irregular photocopying, Caldwell's access to confidential files, and Levington's consistent oversight. Each behavioral pattern intersected with ledger anomalies, creating a clear grid of potential leverage points. Observe also the temporal element, Wolfe continued. Weekends, early mornings, holidays, gaps in oversight are exploited. Cross-reference these periods with anomalies. Minor discrepancies during these times are deliberate. The manipulator is testing diligence, exploiting both opportunity and predictable human behavior. Marlowe paused, pencil hovering. Sir, one other thing. A memo meant for internal review was circulated slightly out of order. Small detail, but it caused a minor adjustment in schedule. Could that be intentional? Wolfe's eyes gleamed with interest. Precisely. Minor procedural anomalies can function as both cover and probe. Observe micro-response. Who notices, who adjusts, who acts, or refrains. Each is a clue. Archie, cross-reference with baseline behavioral data. I scribbled rapidly, noting the intersection of anomaly, behavior, and temporal factors. Each deviation was a thread, but the manipulator's identity remained shrouded by careful orchestration. Observe delegation, Wolfe said, tapping a finger on the ledger. Hargrove occasionally delegates high-value transfers to Benton without formal oversight. Minor procedural divergence introduces opportunity. Analyze responses to this irregularity. Micro-errors or hesitation are indicators. Marlowe nodded, visibly focused now. I've noted every instance of irregular delegation, procedural deviation, and reaction. Even subtle cues, glances, phrasing, posture, I've recorded. Excellent, Wolfe said. Observe redundancy and observation, triangular marks, pencil notations, temporal anomalies, behavioral response, all converge. One misstep, one deviation, and the manipulator's profile emerges. I glanced at Wolfe, who had returned to the ledger, eyes tracing lines like a hawk scanning a forest floor. So it's not just the numbers or routines. Every gesture, hesitation, micro-error, all are data points. Each response is telling if recorded and cross-referenced. Yes, Wolfe said, voice deliberate. Observation, correlation, and measurement. The manipulator relies on predictable human behavior and controlled risk. Our task is to unravel intent through convergence of anomalies and reactions. Marlowe scribbled, now steady, absorbed in the detail. Sir, I also noticed that some employees occasionally question minor discrepancies quietly, to colleagues without formal reporting. Could that indicate awareness? Indeed, Wolfe said. Observe informal scrutiny. Remarks, hesitation, micro-expressions, all reveal cognition without action. These are as valuable as ledger anomalies. Archie, note the subtle interplay between observation and response. Every remark may indicate insight or concealment. I leaned back, letting the complexity settle. So we have ledger anomalies, triangular notations, timing, procedural deviations, delegation, behavioral response, micro-expression, and informal scrutiny, all overlapping. The manipulator's identity is hidden within this convergence. Exactly, Wolfe said, tapping the desk. Observe redundancy, overlap, and response patterns. Each variable is essential. Misinterpret one and the entire analysis may be compromised. Precision and patience are paramount. Marlowe exhaled, pencil poised. Sir, I understand. I'll continue documenting everything, from anomalies to human behavior, and report exactly as observed. Good, Wolfe said, leaning back, eyes narrowing to slits. Observation continues. Controlled interaction within the office environment, subtle prompts, minor deviations, and micro-behavioral analysis all contribute to revelation. Archie, stage 3, controlled observation, must be meticulous. Any error risks exposure or compromise. I scribbled the last of my notes, feeling the pressure tighten. The brownstone, silent except for pencil scratching, and Wolfe's soft tapping, was charged with precision, intent, and anticipation. Every glance, every hesitation, every adjustment mattered. Mr. Marlowe, Wolfe said, voice low, precise. Prepare for immediate application of controlled observation. Archie accompanies you. Record all micro-behavior, timing, access patterns, and interaction. Deviations, however slight, are critical indicators. Understand? Yes, sir, Marlowe said. Steady now, comprehension etched on his face. I understand completely. Good. Then we proceed, Wolfe said, returning to the ledger. Observation, measurement, correlation. The manipulator's identity will emerge from convergence of anomalies, responses, and human behavior. Patience, precision, and attention are our weapons. I exhaled, notebook full, feeling the electric intensity of the brownstone. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent. Inside, we were navigating the lattice of human behavior, ledger anomalies and subtle manipulation, ready to unmask the carefully hidden orchestrator among shadows and numbers. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly, and watched Wolfe as he meticulously rearranged the pages of the ledger, cross-referencing the triangular pencil marks with the anomalies Marlowe had noted. Every slight adjustment of paper, every precise movement of his hand seemed to carry more weight than anything else in the room. Marlowe shifted nervously beside me, pencil poised but trembling slightly as he prepared to record the next set of instructions. "Archie," Wolfe said, voice low but cutting through the quiet, "we have sufficient preliminary observation. We proceed now with controlled intervention within the office environment. This is delicate work, eliciting natural response without arousing suspicion. Even minor provocation can yield a revealing deviation." I nodded, pen ready. Subtle prompts, measured interactions, watching for hesitation or behavioral anomalies. "Got it." "Yes," Wolfe said, tapping a knuckle against the ledger. "Observe the convergence of variables, opportunity, access, human behavior. The manipulator relies on predictable reactions to subtle stimuli. Any variance from expectation will illuminate intent." Marlowe swallowed audibly. "Sir, I can provide access to internal logs, minor communications, even non-critical memos. That might help us establish behavioral baseline before interaction begins." "Excellent," Wolfe said, eyes glinting. "Baseline is vital. Observe, measure, interpret. Minor deviations, subtle gestures, even phrasing, these are data. Archie, catalog every observable micro-response. Mr. Marlowe, ensure completeness of the records." I began cross-referencing the ledger with Marlowe's notes, tracking the timing, access, and procedural deviations, noting the irregular delegations and altered transactions. The lattice of observation stretched wider with each thread, each micro-behavior, each pencil mark feeding the pattern Wolfe was so meticulously mapping. "Observe the triangular notations," Wolfe said, voice deliberate. "They indicate priority, attention points, and potential leverage. Cross-reference each with human activity. Reactions, hesitations, micro-errors. They will indicate knowledge, involvement, or guilt. Archie. Focus." I leaned in closer, pen moving rapidly. "So every marked account, each minor anomaly, each deviation is a potential indicator. Observing reactions to these will reveal who knows what." "Exactly," Wolfe said. "And note the psychological overlay. Fear, anticipation, and responsibility influence behavior. Mr. Marlowe is under pressure. The manipulator understands the human psyche, counting on natural responses to stress. These responses, minor as they may seem, are as revealing as the ledger itself." Marlowe's pencil moved faster, lines appearing with increasing confidence. "Sir, I also noticed that employees sometimes handle high-value transfers while consulting minimal documentation. It seems routine, but it correlates with anomalies. Could that indicate manipulation?" "Indeed," Wolfe said, eyes narrowing. "Opportunity leveraged through routine. Minor procedural deviations provide concealment for precise actions. Archie, record each instance, noting timing, access, and behavioral response. Micro-errors or hesitations are critical indicators." I scribbled, observing the patterns. Hargrove's weekend audits, Benton's irregular photocopying, Caldwell's access to confidential files, Levington's consistent oversight, all intersecting with ledger anomalies to create a grid of potential leverage points. "Note the temporal distribution," Wolfe continued. "Weekends, early mornings, holidays, gaps in oversight. Minor discrepancies during these periods are deliberate. The manipulator is testing vigilance and exploiting predictable patterns. Record, cross-reference, and analyze." Marlowe paused. "Sir, one other point. A memo meant for internal review circulated slightly out of order. It caused a minor adjustment in schedule. Could that be intentional?" Wolfe's lips twitched. "Precisely. Minor procedural anomalies often serve dual purposes. Concealment and testing response. Observe micro-behavior, who notices, who adjusts, who acts. Each response is a clue. Archie, cross-reference with baseline behavior data. Deviations reveal comprehension or concealment. I scribbled furiously, noting the intersection of behavioral cues, ledger anomalies, and minor procedural deviations. The manipulator's identity remained shrouded, yet threads were beginning to converge. "Observe delegation," Wolfe said, tapping the desk. "Hargrove occasionally delegates high-value transfers to Benton without formal oversight. These minor irregularities introduce opportunity. Analyze reactions. Each hesitation or adjustment may indicate awareness of manipulation or direct involvement." Marlowe nodded, pencil moving steadily. "I've noted every instance, including glances, phrasing, and posture. Even subtle interactions, I've recorded them all." "Excellent," Wolfe said. "Observe redundancy. Triangular marks, pencil notations, temporal anomalies, and behavioral responses all converge. One revealing deviation exposes the manipulator. Archie, attention to detail is paramount." I glanced at Wolfe, noting his unwavering intensity. "So it's all interconnected. Numbers, routines, gestures, micro-errors, deviations, all part of the lattice. One misstep, one overlooked signal, and the manipulator becomes visible." "Yes," Wolfe said, tapping the ledger. "Integration is essential. Single variables alone may be insignificant. Multiple aligned variables reveal intent. Observation, correlation, and interpretation are required to deduce the orchestrator's identity." Marlowe exhaled, pencil poised but steady. "Sir, I understand. I'll continue to record everything exactly as observed. No assumptions, no interpretation." "Good," Wolfe said, leaning back, eyes narrowing to slits. "Controlled observation continues. Minor prompts, deviations, and micro-behavioral responses all contribute to the identification of the manipulator. Stage 3 is in motion. Accuracy is essential. Any error risks exposure or compromise." I scribbled the final notes, feeling the electric tension in the brownstone. Every gesture, glance, and micro-error mattered. Wolfe's mind was calculating, predicting, triangulating patterns we could barely see, poised to strike at the first revealing anomaly. "Mr. Marlowe," Wolfe said finally, voice cutting through the quiet, "prepare for immediate application of controlled observation. Archie will accompany you, documenting all behavior, access, and interaction. Any deviation, however minor, may be critical. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Marlowe said, nodding, hands steady now. "I understand completely." "Good," Wolfe said, returning to the ledger. "Observation, measurement, and correlation. The manipulator's identity will emerge from convergence of anomalies, responses, and human behavior. Patience, precision, and vigilance are our tools. Archie, proceed." I exhaled slowly, pen hovering over the notebook. The brownstone was quiet, charged with purpose. Outside, the city moved on oblivious, while inside, every glance, gesture, and hesitation was vital. The manipulator remained hidden, but the lattice of data was beginning to illuminate the path toward exposure. I pushed back from the desk, running a hand through my hair as Wolfe examined the ledger with that same hawk-like intensity. Marlowe sat nearby, pencil poised, brow furrowed, trying to anticipate the next instruction from Wolfe's precise, almost surgical rhythm. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to taste, yet Wolfe remained entirely composed, his mind clearly already several steps ahead. "Archie," Wolfe said, his voice cutting through the quiet like a scalpel. "Our controlled observation phase begins in earnest. You accompany Mr. Marlowe to the firm, observing without overt intrusion. Every gesture, hesitation, and micro-behavior is data. Every minor deviation from routine must be catalogued." I nodded, pen already poised. "So we walk in, blend and note reactions to normal operations. Minor anomalies, subtle cues, Anything that might indicate knowledge or involvement. Yes, Wolfe said, tapping the ledger. And observe the triangulated accounts. They serve as focal points. Compare access, timing, procedural adherence, and informal communication. The manipulator relies on habitual compliance and predictable human response. Subtle deviation will expose intent. Marlowe swallowed audibly. Sir, I've prepared a summary of anomalies, but I can provide more granular detail if needed. Specific transactions, minor procedural lapses, interactions among staff. I've noted everything I could observe. Excellent, Wolfe said, voice precise. Baseline. Data is essential. Archie, cross-reference anomalies with human behavior, micro-expressions, and access logs. Record all deviations, however minor. Each is a potential indicator of manipulation or knowledge. I adjusted my notebook and glanced at Marlowe, who was now steadily writing, his initial nervousness replaced by focused concentration. So each deviation, hesitation, or subtle error may indicate involvement, and we're measuring micro-responses under the pretense of ordinary routine. Precisely, Wolfe said. And note the psychological component. Fear, expectation, responsibility, all influence behavior. Mr. Marlowe, as courier, is under pressure. Employees may react subconsciously to procedural anomalies or minor challenges. Document all responses with precision. Marlowe nodded, pencil moving steadily now. Sir, I noticed that certain employees sometimes double-check each other's work quietly. Not overtly, just minor confirmations. Could those indicate awareness of anomalies? Indeed, Wolfe said, eyes narrowing. Observe informal verification, micro-corrections, and hesitation. These are often more revealing than overt action. Archie, cross-reference informal scrutiny with ledger anomalies, timing and behavioral deviation. Micro-behavior under observation is critical. I scribbled furiously. So it's ledger anomalies, procedural deviations, delegation irregularities, timing and human response, all interconnected. And any micro-behavior under subtle pressure becomes a clue. Exactly, Wolfe said. Observe redundancy in analysis, triangular marks, pencil annotations, temporal anomalies, behavioral response, all intersect. Minor errors, subtle glances, hesitations, all are signals. The manipulator is careful but relies on predictable human behavior. Stage 3 will expose the orchestrator. Marlowe's pencil hovered. Sir, I also noticed that employees occasionally discuss minor discrepancies quietly, without formal reporting. Could that indicate indirect awareness? Precisely, Wolfe said. Informal observation and communication reveal cognition without action. Subtle shifts in speech, phrasing, or attention are data points. Archie, catalog all micro-interactions. They are as significant as the ledger entries themselves. I nodded, making detailed notes. So controlled observation now involves subtle prompts, micro-challenges, and careful measurement of human reaction, all without alerting the subjects. Yes, Wolfe said, tapping the ledger deliberately. And note the convergence, timing, access, procedural deviation, micro-behavior, and informal scrutiny, aligned, expose the manipulator. Single data points may mislead. Convergence reveals intent. Pay close attention, Archie. Marlowe exhaled slowly. I understand, sir. I'll continue to document every observation, from behavior to procedural adherence, as instructed. Good, Wolfe said. Now, we proceed to correlation. Archie, take anomalies identified during observation and cross-reference with baseline behavior, procedural norms, and access logs. Any micro-deviation aligned with triangular markings, pencil notations, or temporal anomalies becomes significant. Record and analyze. I glanced at Wolfe. noting the intensity in his eyes, the subtle twitch of his fingers as they hovered above the ledger. Every movement, every line, every minor adjustment carried weight. Outside, the city moved oblivious, yet inside the brownstone, every second of observation was critical. "Mr. Marlowe," Wolfe said, voice low but precise, "you will accompany Archie to the firm and facilitate access without alerting anyone. Observation is our tool, not confrontation. Deviations, hesitation, or micro-behavioral response are data. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Marlowe said firmly, hands steady now. "I understand completely. I'll follow instructions precisely." "Good," Wolfe said, leaning back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Observation, measurement, and correlation will reveal the manipulator. Each variable, behavior, access, timing, procedural anomaly, micro-expression, is a piece of the puzzle. Precision is essential. Patience, vigilance, and meticulous documentation are our weapons." I scribbled the final notes, feeling the electric intensity of the room. The lattice of observation, behavioral analysis, and ledger anomalies was converging, each thread interlacing with another, each deviation bringing the manipulator closer to exposure. "Archie," Wolfe continued, voice cutting through the quiet, "remember, controlled interaction is key. Subtle deviation provokes natural response. Minor prompts, micro-challenges, and subtle irregularities will yield insight. Observe reactions, note micro-behavior, and document anomalies. This is the final stage before identification." I exhaled slowly, notebook full, eyes darting between Wolfe and Marlowe. The brownstone hummed with tension, anticipation, and precision. Outside, the city remained indifferent, but inside, every glance, hesitation, and micro-behavior was vital. The manipulator remained hidden, but the lattice of observation and deduction was closing in. "Mr. Marlowe," Wolfe said finally, voice smooth but absolute, "prepare for immediate field application. Archie will accompany you, cataloging all behavior, access, and interaction. Any deviation, however minor, may reveal identity. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Marlowe said, resolute. "I understand completely. I'll follow instructions meticulously." "Good," Wolfe said, returning to the ledger, fingers drumming softly. "Observation, correlation, and measurement. The manipulator's identity will emerge from convergence of anomalies, reactions, and human behavior. Patience, precision, and vigilance. These are our tools. Archie, proceed with field observation. Stage 3 is now in motion." I exhaled again, letting the tension settle, feeling the weight of every observation, every notation, every micro-behavior. Outside, life went on, oblivious, but inside, the lattice of deduction, behavioral scrutiny, and subtle intervention was about to expose the carefully hidden orchestrator whose identity remained shrouded until the final convergence. I stepped back into the brownstone with Marlowe trailing, clutching his notes like a talisman, the tension in his shoulders finally easing only slightly. Wolfe sat behind his desk, eyes narrowed, hands steepled, the ledger spread before him like a map of human frailty. He didn't look up immediately. He never did. He was already weighing every detail, every nuance we had recorded over the last several days. "Archie," he said finally, voice low, deliberate. "We are now at the point where observation, correlation, and deduction converge. The manipulator's pattern is complete. Every deviation, hesitation, and micro-behavior has been recorded and analyzed. Mr. Marlowe, your diligence has preserved the integrity of data. Without it, our conclusions would be speculative." Marlowe exhaled, shoulders slumping, a mixture of relief and lingering fear in his expression. "Sir, I thank you. I tried to follow instructions perfectly, but I never imagined it would come to this level of detail." "Detail is the vehicle of truth," Wolfe said, lifting his gaze to Marlowe, piercing and precise. Accuracy, observation, and the human element, the three pillars that reveal intent and opportunity. Archie, present your notes. I laid my notebook on the desk, sliding it toward Wolfe. He examined it, thumbs tracing key sections, eyes flicking between ledger anomalies, pencil marks, triangular notations, and the carefully catalogued micro-behaviors we had recorded. "The pattern is undeniable," Wolfe said finally, tapping a knuckle against the ledger. "Observe, access, timing, procedural deviation, and behavioral response converge at a single point. Each variable intersects with the triangular marks. Each deviation corresponds with knowledge of both ledger manipulation and internal processes. The orchestrator is predictable, yet careful. Clever, but compelled by greed and fear of exposure." I glanced at Marlowe, whose face was taut with anticipation. "Sir, who is it?" Wolfe's lip twitched faintly. "The data indicates one individual, one opportunity, one motive." "Levington. Senior partner. Access, control, and procedural authority align with ledger anomalies. Behavioral responses during our observation, subtle hesitation under minor challenges, informal communications, all point to him. The triangular markings correspond to accounts under his direct supervision. Timing of manipulated transactions coincides with his predictable routines. Signature errors, procedural deviations, and human response confirm it." Marlowe's eyes widened. "Levington? But he's respected. Careful. I never would have suspected." "Careful," Wolfe said, voice sharp. "Yes, but not infallible. Even the most disciplined mind reveals itself under observation when subtle deviations are orchestrated and recorded. Our controlled observation phase has illuminated what access alone could not. Predictable human behavior under pressure is the key." I leaned back, letting the logic settle. So all the anomalies, the pencil markings, the micro-behaviors, they all converged to expose him. It was methodical, precise. Classic Wolfe deduction. "Yes," Wolfe said, leaning forward, hands pressed lightly on the ledger. "Observe the motive. Greed and fear intertwined. Levington orchestrated the minor adjustments and omissions to cover embezzlement while monitoring compliance. The envelope, the triangular markings, the controlled delivery, they were all part of a carefully constructed experiment to test reliability and observe responses, ensuring his manipulations remained concealed. Psychological control and opportunity aligned perfectly." Marlowe shook his head, pale but resolute. I see it now. All the details I observed, the ledger anomalies, the timing, the minor errors. It pointed directly to him. I didn't realize how carefully it was designed to conceal his involvement." Wolfe inclined his head once, sharply, precisely. "Observation and human behavior reveal what brute evidence cannot. The final convergence of anomalies and reactions exposes both pattern and perpetrator. Archie, make a note. Embezzlement and behavioral manipulation confirmed. Culprit. Levington. Evidence, ledger anomalies, procedural deviations, timing, and human response." I scribbled furiously, the pieces finally falling into place. Each hesitation, glance, and minor error recorded in the field had contributed to Wolfe's precise calculation. Every micro-behavior, every triangular mark, every subtle deviation from routine had revealed the orchestrator behind the manipulation. "Now," Wolfe continued, voice low and deliberate, "we confront. Observation alone has led to deduction. Confrontation is not required to validate analysis, but to elicit final acknowledgement. Mr. Marlowe, you have fulfilled your role. Precision preserved the integrity of observation. We now allow the manipulator to respond." Marlowe exhaled, visibly relieved, though his hands still trembled slightly. "Sir, what will happen now?" Wolfe's eyes, sharp and unwavering, met mine. The manipulator will be presented with evidence, behavioral analysis, and pattern convergence. The logic is irrefutable. No theatrics, no conjecture, no reliance on coincidence. All evidence aligns. This is deduction, not spectacle. I nodded, feeling the familiar satisfaction of seeing Wolfe's mind unravel a complex puzzle with exacting precision. Every thread we had recorded, every observation meticulously noted, every minor deviation had contributed to a single, inescapable conclusion. "And observe," Wolfe said, voice softer but no less commanding. "The moral element, greed, concealment, and fear create vulnerability. The orchestrator's meticulous planning could not shield against human observation and reasoned deduction. Predictable behavior under subtle pressure is the undoing of careful deception." Marlowe leaned back, letting the weight of Wolfe's analysis settle. I understand now. Every detail mattered. Every gesture, every hesitation, every micro-error. All led here. "Yes," Wolfe said, tapping the ledger gently. "Observation, correlation, controlled prompts, behavioral measurement, all converge to reveal truth. Intent, opportunity, and knowledge aligned perfectly. Pattern recognition and human response are sufficient to expose even the most careful manipulator. The system, when observed with precision, cannot conceal intent indefinitely." I glanced at Wolfe, a faint smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Classic Wolfe. No dramatics, just relentless logic and impeccable timing. The manipulator's hubris was their undoing. Wolfe's gaze softened, just slightly, as if acknowledging the truth of that. "Indeed, Archie. And now the conclusion is simple. Pattern, behavior, and opportunity reveal identity. The orchestrator, Levington, will be confronted with facts and the inevitability of deduction. No theatrics, no coincidence, only logic and careful observation." Marlowe exhaled, shoulders finally relaxing. "Thank you, sir. I couldn't have done it without your guidance. Every detail mattered." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "And the lesson endures. Observation, meticulous recording, and attention to microbehavior expose deception. The human element, under scrutiny, reveals what manipulation cannot entirely conceal. Intent will surface through careful measurement, even when opportunity and skill are applied with precision." I scribbled the final note. The brownstone unusually quiet except for Wolfe's deliberate breathing and the soft rustle of paper. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent, oblivious to the conclusion quietly unfolding within these walls. Inside, the lattice of observation, behavioral scrutiny, and deduction had revealed the orchestrator, exposed the subtle manipulations, and restored order with nothing more than intellect, patience, and precise measurement. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes narrowing for a final assessment. "Archie, observe. Deduction, when applied with patience, precision, and attention to human behavior, cannot fail. The manipulator, regardless of skill, reveals themselves in the convergence of anomaly, opportunity, and response. Human behavior is predictable, if measured carefully, with diligence and logic." I closed my notebook, feeling the tension finally ease. "And that's why you do it better than anyone. Every micro-behavior, every ledger anomaly, every tiny deviation, it all points to the truth. Simple, precise, inevitable." Wolfe inclined his head slightly, the faintest sign of approval. "Indeed. Greed and fear are the architects of downfall. Observation and reason are the instruments of justice. Let us close this matter formally and allow the system to take its course." Marlowe exhaled, visibly relieved, pencil dropped, hands finally steady. "Thank you, sir. I understand now how every detail mattered." "And remember," Wolfe said, voice precise, "the human element is always the greatest variable. Even in the most carefully calculated scheme, predictable behavior under subtle pressure reveals the orchestrator. Always. I let out a dry laugh, glancing at Wolfe. And that's why you're Wolfe, and I'm just the messenger. Wolfe inclined his head slightly, lips twitching in the faintest acknowledgement. The brownstone, quiet again, held its weight. The ledger closed, the envelope set aside, the manipulator's identity revealed, and the lattice of observation finally complete. Every thread had been measured, every pattern analyzed, every subtle human reaction recorded, and the truth had emerged unerringly.